Good evening and a very warm welcome to everyone for this edition of the MBA Invitation Lecture Series by the Department of Management Studies, IIT Madras. The MBA Invitation Lecture Series was conceived with a view to inviting leaders from the industry to share their experience and wisdom with us. Some of the speakers we've had over the past year are Ms. Hemu Ramaiah, founder of Landmark Bookstores, Mr. Sundararajan, ex-CMD of Indian Bank, and Mr. Abhay Gupte, CEO at Logica India. I would now like to call upon Professor Nagarajan to address us with a few words.
Good evening. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Affairs, I want to welcome all the students, the faculty, staff, and local alumni to this lecture. Anand is an alumnus of this institute, 1993 pass out, and it's always a pleasure to welcome alumni back to campus, especially when they have done so many wonderful and successful things in their lives as Anand has. And I'm sure that he will serve as an inspiration to all of you, to all of us, really. I just also wanted to say briefly that this is really the start of various lectures that we are hoping to offer from our alumni in various fields. And I don't want to spoil the suspense, but we will have some excellent speakers to follow in Anand's footsteps, but we have saved the best for first this time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Today we are delighted to have with us Mr. Anand Rajaraman, Senior Vice President at Walmart Labs and alumnus of IIT Madras. During his time here, he won the President of India Gold Medal Award. He then went on to do his MS and PhD in Computer Science from Stanford University. While at Stanford, Mr. Rajaraman co-wrote a paper which is among the top 600 most cited computer science articles in the last 20 years. Mr. Rajaraman has extensive research and development experience at Stanford University, AT&T Bell Labs, and Xerox, with numerous publications, patents, and awards at leading academic and industry forums. He co-founded Junglee Corp in 1996, which was a pioneer in internet comparison shopping. Later, when Junglee Corp was acquired by Amazon.com, he went on to become the director of technology there. In 2000, he co-founded Cambridge Ventures, an early-stage venture capitalist fund. In 2005, he co-founded Cosmix, a website which organizes internet content by topic. Upon the acquisition of Cosmix by Walmart, Mr. Rajaraman serves as Senior Vice President there. He also serves as Consulting Assistant Professor at Stanford University's Computer Science Department and as Investor, Advisor, and Board Member to several Silicon Valley startups. He has been featured in articles in the Business Week, the San Francisco Chronicle, and other leading national publications. He recently co-authored a textbook called Mining of Massive Data Sets with a Stanford University professor. He regularly writes about venture capital, entrepreneurship, and social media on his blog Data Walkie and on Twitter. I would now like to call upon Jagrati to welcome him with a bouquet. I would now like to call upon Mr. Rajaraman to address us.
Thanks for the introduction and the warm welcome, everyone. You know, it's I went to school. I went to IIT Madras and I graduated in 1993. I was here from 1989 to 93. Did my BTech in computer science, and I listened to so many lectures like this, sitting in the audience, and it's a tremendous kick to be on the other side, and talking instead for it's a real pleasure to be back here at IIT Madras. When Professor Thilla invited me here, so I asked him what I should talk about. And so when Professor Thilla invited me, I asked him what I should talk about, and he said, talk about your entrepreneurial journey. What have you how did you start up companies, and and various things like that. The overall course of your career and any learnings that students might take from that. And then I thought, how do I do that, right? And if I do it the obvious way, it's going to be very boring, right? So I'll just say, I did this, I did that, and we started this company got bought, we did that. I mean, that's not going to be very interesting. It's not going to be a fun talk. So I wanted to make it fun and interesting and entertaining. And so I thought about, how do you make something like this, a story of, entrepreneurship, interesting and fun, to a general audience, not necessarily an audience that's specifically interested in the specific areas of the companies that I did or anything like that. And then I remembered I looked for examples, and the best example I could find was this movie, The Social Network, that talks about Facebook and how it got started and various the story of Facebook. How many of you have seen the movie The Social Network? Great, so almost everyone has seen it. So I use The Social Network as my inspiration. Clearly, I didn't start Facebook, so it has to be a slightly different story. So I was thinking, let me try to use a format similar to The Social Network. And the format The Social Network uses is, to describe, to use a series of anecdotes, right, to sort of illustrate, and the anecdotes are kind of picked at random from the evolution of the company, and pick the most interesting anecdotes rather than try to tell a chronological story, right? So that was kind of the thought process that I went through. So that's how this talk is organized. It's organized as a series of anecdotes, not necessarily chronological, from the course of my career, and hopefully it all makes sense at the end, right? When we come there and we put all these anecdotes together, maybe something makes sense at the end. If you sort of look back to my whole career, there have been two phases, right? First, I was at IIT Madras from 1989 to 93, as I said. I did my BTech in computer science. And how many computer science students do we have here? Welcome. So welcome to everybody else too. But and then I went to Stanford, where I started working on my PhD in computer science, and I didn't complete it at that time. I dropped out, and I started my first company, a company called Junglee. And Junglee was acquired by a company that many of you may have heard of called Amazon.com, right? This was back in 1998. Then I spent a couple of years at Amazon, and then I started a venture capital firm called Cambrian Ventures, invested in a whole bunch of companies. Then I started another company called Cosmix, and that company was acquired by another company you may have heard of called Walmart. And so now I head up this thing called Walmart Labs. So this is kind of the chronological ordering of things that happen. But if you sort of look at this, there's two distinct phases in my career. And the year that sort of clearly separates them is this year, 1996, right? Until this year, 1996, I had no idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, right? How many people in this audience know they want to be entrepreneurs? There's a fair number, right? So I was not among you guys. I had no clue that I wanted to be an entrepreneur when I was at IIT or even in my first few years at Stanford. In fact, my interest was in doing research, right? And my ambition when I started at Stanford and even my first couple of years was to do interesting research, publish papers, maybe become a faculty member. So this was my ambition when I went to Stanford. But somewhere along the way, that's why I titled my talk, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, right? It was not something that I sort of strive to do from an early age or something like this. And but in 1996, something happened. And that something, I think, was largely the internet. Right? The World Wide Web kind of started taking off at around the time that I was in Stanford. And that was kind of the impetus that that inspired some of us who were at Stanford at the time to start our first company, Junglee, right? And I'll tell you a little bit about how that happened. Right. So I've written this as a how-to manual, right? So this thing here. It's a a dish of vegetables and fruits and so on. And it's actually a Jewish dish of vegetables and fruits. Anybody know its name? This is not goulash. No, it's Jewish. Goulash is Polish or Hungarian or something. No? Okay, well, it's called, it happens to be called tzimmes, right? So, so why is this relevant, right? So this kind of is the start of my story. Why is this Jewish dish of fruits and vegetables, which is called tzimmes, even relevant? It's relevant because this was the name of the research project that I was working on at Stanford. Okay, and tzimmes is actually an acronym, made-up acronym that stands for the Stanford IBM Manager of Multiple Information Sources, right? So, so this was the research project I was working on at Stanford. And when I was working on this research project in the computer science department at Stanford, I was working on it with a couple of other people. The guy up there on top, his name is Venki, also from IIT Madras, class of 88. And the guy below is Ashish Gupta, IIT Kanpur, class of maybe 87 or 88 or something. And so we were working on this on this research project at Stanford. And what we were doing in this project, and this is the only technical diagram in this whole talk, right? So this one here. And I promise there's no more technical stuff in this talk. So what we were doing was we were taking data that was in kind of multiple databases and typically in kind of databases and within companies, and figuring out how to integrate it and create what's called a virtual database of all that information. And so while we were doing this research, something happened, and that something was that the World Wide Web came around. Right? When the web came around, we said, look, this stuff, we're taking all this data that's in all this corporate databases and all that and integrating it and creating virtual databases and so on, which is all well and good. But it'd be much more exciting to do this not with corporate databases, but data that's out on the web. Because there's way more data out on the web, and that's way more interesting than in some corporate data sources. So we said, we went to our professors and we told them, look, we shouldn't be working on all these corporate data sources. We should be focusing on the web. And our professor said, no, because we have all this funding from IBM and we have to work on all these corporate data sources, forget the web. Web is, that's, you can't write research papers about that stuff. So, so we didn't, so that's when we said, look, if we can't do research, but this is fundamentally more exciting to us, then perhaps what we should do is take this and start a company and go do it in that context, right? So that's how we sort of got the idea of starting a company. We really wanted to take the stuff that we were doing and do it on the web, and there was no way to do that in the context of the research that we were doing at Stanford. And so we said, look, instead let's just start a company and then do it in that context. Maybe that way we can do what we really want to do, right? So that was the birth, the origin of Jungli, right? And so at around this time, while we were thinking about this, we ran into this other guy. His name is Rakesh Mathur, IIT Bombay. Class of 77 or something like this. He had been an entrepreneur in the past and encouraged us to sort of, along this path and became a co-founder. So this was the other group that were the co-founders of Jungli. So there's Venki, Ashish, Rakesh, and myself. So we said, look, this is a cool idea. Let's go start a company around this idea of building virtual databases, but doing it with data on the web. So that was the origin of the company. Now, clearly we said, we decided that we're going to drop out and we're going to start this company, but we had, but I had one obstacle that I had to clear before I did that, and that was that I had to drop out of school, right? So, I was for doing my PhD, and I was this nice South Indian boy, who was like told that education is important and all this stuff, and you have to finish your PhD, and here I was destined for a career in research and so on, and I had to drop out of school to do this company. So it was a very drastic step to contemplate. if you had a really good idea, how many of you here would drop out of school to go pursue it? See, not too many, right? So it does take, some thinking. So I had to do it. So at this time, and the gentleman on the left there, his name is Professor Jeff Ullman. He was my PhD research advisor at Stanford. And so I went to Jeff, and I told Jeff, hey Jeff, research is cool and all, but I really want to drop out and that I want to start this company. And I expected him to tell me that I was completely nuts, right? That I shouldn't be doing anything like this, that I should go back and finish my PhD and stuff like this. But instead, Jeff surprised me. He said, if you really believe that what you're doing is important, go drop out of school. Go start the company, right? And prove that what you're doing is valuable. And then, if you actually build something that's hugely valuable, that's more interesting than writing a PhD thesis. So so this was Jeff's advice to me, and it actually helped me a great deal as I was thinking about this, and helped me make the decision that I was excited enough about the idea that I drop out of school and go do this company. So I did end up dropping out and starting the company. So we started the company, and we had to find a name for it. Now the first, what we were doing was we were crawling the web, and we were gathering a lot of information, and we were kind of putting it together. So we were building some kind of web spider and stuff like that. And so it turns out that the first name we came up with was Atacop. How many of you know what Atacop is? That's the problem. Nobody knows what Atacop is, right? So that's a bad name. So we decided that's not such a hot name. So Atacop actually turns out. How many of you have read Lord of the Rings? You've not seen the movie, read the actual book. Okay, there's a few, right? So Atacop, it turns out, is the name of a spider that appears in Lord of the Rings, and we were big Lord of the Rings fans, so that's why we called it Atacop. But it's a small minority of people who get that, so that's a bad name, right? So now the problem is, when you start a company, one of the things that you have to do is you have to go raise funding, right? You've got to get money from somebody, from an investor, to go build what you want to build, and we had set up a meeting with an investor the next day. So we had to prepare a presentation to show that investor, to tell him why this is a good idea and why he should invest in this company. And we thought we needed a good name for the company when we gave that presentation. So we got together in Ashish's house, and we thought, we worked on the presentation for the investor the next day. And but we still couldn't come up with a name for the company, and we threw out, tried various names. A big problem, the .com domain is taken, right? So that's always a problem when you're trying to find a name. You need to find a name where you can get the .com domain name, and it's hard to find because all the common ones are taken, even back in '96, right? So we did something that I don't encourage you guys to do, which is we had beer, right? At least until you're 21. So we had, we sat in Ashish's house and we were having beer, and we were, this is to stimulate creativity, obviously, right? And we were trying to come up with the name, there's a reality distortion feel that comes when you sort of imbibe enough, and we came up with, this idea, and that was, an inspiration for us was the company Yahoo, right? Yahoo had been similarly started by a couple of Stanford graduate students who had, as a matter of fact, dropped out of Stanford to start Yahoo a couple of years ahead of us. And Yahoo had just gone public, and it was a huge success. So Yahoo was a clear inspiration. And suddenly one of us remembered this movie, Jungly. right? I don't know why. I think it was a beer. So remember the movie Jungly. And if you remember the movie, there's a song in that movie, which I wish I could play. If I had audio, I'd play it. It goes, Yahoo, chahe koi mujhe jungli kahe. How many of you have heard that song? Awesome. Yeah. So there's that song, and we said, after Yahoo comes Jungly, right? Yeah. So that's why we call the company Jungly, right? And then, of course, we actually came up with lots of rationalizations later, right? Which I'll explain to you in a moment. But we. So that was the original logo of the company as well. We call it Jungly, and that was a logo that we designed. So great, we had the company, and then we had to come up with funding. So how did we do that? So the gentleman there, his name is Tsuyoshi Taira, Taira-san as we call him, and he is used to be the chairman of Sanyo Semiconductor in the US. And it so happened that Rakesh Mathur, who was one of my co-founders, knew him. And Tsuyoshi Taira is what's known as an angel investor in Silicon Valley, right? So he puts together groups of individuals who invest in early stage companies. So we had to meet, we were planning to meet Tsuyoshi Taira and tell him about our idea the next day. So he was at this conference called the TAI conference, which is some people here know about TAI. And how many of you here know about TAI? Great, yeah, it's a terrific organization. So Taira-san was at the TAI conference. TAI has an annual conference. Taira-san was going to be there, so we're going to meet him at the TAI conference. And when we get to the TAI conference, we could actually get hold of Taira-san because he's always sitting in some session or the other. So we decided to go and pull him out of one of the sessions. So we went in, we dragged him out of one of the sessions, and we said, look, you have to listen to this pitch. And we made him listen to the story. He really liked the name Jungly, by the way. He said, look, I really like you guys, and he helped us raise our first seed round of funding on the basis of that pitch. So later on, this was several years later, clearly after he had given us the money. So I went and, we asked him, what did you see in us, right? So we were this group of students, 4 of us who clearly had no experience whatsoever. We had this presentation, which is, now I look back on it, it looks, not so great. What made you, what prompted you to trust us and give us this funding? And Taira-san actually had a very interesting answer. He said, you guys have good chemistry. He actually said, you guys have good chemical, but I think what he meant was you guys have good chemistry, right? So, several years later, as I picked up my own experience, I've come to realize how important that is actually, having good chemistry among founders. How many of you want to be entrepreneurs? Yeah. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, one piece of advice that I give you is to choose your co-founders really carefully, right? I've worked with lots of companies, and one of the most common reasons that companies die is because co-founders can't get along, right? Lack of chemistry between co-founders. And in the early days, or when the going is good, or in the early days when there's a big adrenaline rush and so on, it's very easy to get along, and people, there's rose-colored glasses and so on. But it's during the tough times, which there inevitably will be. Every startup is a roller coaster. There are going to be good times, there are going to be bad times. It's in the bad times that chemistry between co-founders is actually tested. And the question is, can you and your co-founder have a very heated argument where you completely believe in completely different things and yet remain friends, right? So that's the very important criterion to keep in mind when you're when you're picking your co-founders. You need to have good chemistry with your co-founders. You will not always agree with them, right? But you have to trust them despite the fact that you don't agree with them, right? So that's the tricky part of picking co-founders. So keep that in mind. And so when chemistry is really bad, you know what happens? Yeah, so that's what happens to many startups when there's bad chemistry between co-founders. So that's terrific. So we had our seed round of funding, and we worked really hard, and we built a prototype of the product. And the product that we built was focused on the space called classified advertising, online classifieds. We built an online job listing engine that would aggregate job listings from all over the web, and you could search for jobs and so on. And we were looking for customers, and at the same time we were looking for our next round of funding, because there's only so far a seed round of funding will take you. Beyond that, you have to raise your next round of funding. And this is where we hit the snag. Now it turns out that we were in Silicon Valley meeting with many VC firms, and telling them, hey, here's a great idea, please you give us some money, and they all said no. And why does this happen? I mean, you usually think if you have a good idea, you go to a VC firm, they write you a check, right? So it turns out that it's not, we were one of the earliest examples of students, okay, from Stanford starting companies. In the past, there had been companies that had been started by faculty members, by professors and so on, but not by students. Yahoo was one example, and then we were the next. And there was not that much, the VCs in Silicon Valley had never seen this. In 1996, they hadn't seen an example of students starting a company and being successful other than Yahoo, right? And so they were like, they were not willing to take the risk. Like, look, you guys are students. How can we, yeah, you have a cool product, but do you know how to run a company? So it was really, really hard to go raise funding. In fact, I have saved some of the rejection letters we got from the VCs from that time. And so this is when we had to innovate, right? As a startup, when you hit tough times, you innovate. So what we did was we actually ended up getting as our first customer the Washington Post. The Washington Post is one of the biggest newspaper digital publishing groups in the US, and they were far thinking ahead to realize that back in 1996, that classified advertising was going to go online, right? It's not going to remain in the print newspaper anymore. Back in 1996, this was not common wisdom, right? Back in this was still the early days of the internet, but the Washington Post was believed us, and they became our first customer, and their online job listing site was powered by our engine, and they also became our first major investor, because we couldn't raise funding from any venture capitalist. We raised funding from our customer. So the Washington Post became our first big investor and a board member as well. So moral of the story is, be persistent when you run into issues, and if you're persistent and you keep trying, good things will happen, right? So that's what happened to us. And the other interesting lesson from entrepreneurship is that very often the first thing that you do, the first idea that you do in a company isn't exactly right. It doesn't always work out, right? And it's very easy to give up at that point, because you've invested a lot of hard work, invested a lot of effort in building something, and it's just not taking off. The customer adoption just isn't there. You're not able to raise funding. It's just not happening as well as you think, right? So at this point, and this happens, by the way, not to almost every startup, not just a few. This is a common case, that the first thing that any startup tries usually doesn't work. Okay? And what do you do if at first it doesn't work? You try again, right? So you do something called the pivot, and the pivot is a Silicon Valley terminology. That means you kind of take what you have and you try to turn it around slightly and apply it in a slightly different space, and hopefully it kind of works in that new space that you apply it in, if it didn't apply in the old place. And there have been several examples of the pivot. For example, in Jungly, that's the company we were just talking about. So the online classified business that we actually did very well initially. Jungly, very soon, within a year, we powered the online classifieds job search engines of every major newspaper, almost every major newspaper in the US. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, everybody was our customer, right? But we realized one thing very soon, right? The newspapers didn't want to pay us that much money, right? They were customers, but it was very hard getting a lot of revenue out of them. So, so we were very successful from an adoption point of view, but not hugely successful from a revenue point of view. And so what did we have to do? We had to pivot, right? So we had to figure out what could we do? We had to change something. So while we were wondering what to do, we had a meeting with Yahoo. And Yahoo said, you have this cool technology. Do you think you can apply it to the shopping space instead of the classified space, right? And we said, yeah, of course we can, right? And in fact, we'd already been thinking about that. And this was on a Friday when we had this meeting. So Yahoo said, well, in that case, let's come and meet us on Monday and show us how to apply this to the shopping space. So we said, very well. And then we worked like hell over the weekend. And we applied our technology to the shopping space, and we built the first prototype of a comparison shopping engine, which takes the same technology that we had, but instead of applying to job listings, applied it to products. And so we went and met Yahoo on Monday, and we showed them, look, it's working, guys. And then Yahoo became the first customer for our second product, which was a comparison shopping engine as opposed to a classifieds engine. And it turned out that shopping is way more interesting from a revenue point of view than jobs, at least back in 1996, 97. Now it's not the case. Actually, no, probably now it's still the case. And then we were we got a deal with Yahoo. We got deals with many others. We got our revenue started taking off. Usage started taking off, and Junglee became very, very popular around 97, 98, and around the time Amazon came to us because they were interested in what we were doing and decided to buy Junglee. So that was kind of the evolution of how we sort of pivoted from what we were doing initially to doing something slightly different, which then led to success, right? So that was a pivot in the case of Junglee. Now we also had to do something similar in the case of my second startup. It's not as if the second time you do a startup, you get it right. You're going to get it wrong anyway, even the second time. So the second company that we did, this company called Cosmix, and there again, our initial idea that we started out with ended up not being exactly on target. And we spent a couple of years pursuing that, and then we decided to slightly change it and do something different. And it worked the second time around, and we ended up being acquired by Walmart. And the same thing is true for many other things. So Amazon Mechanical, how many of you have heard of Amazon Mechanical Turk? Some of you. But so Amazon Mechanical Turk, go read about it. It's I'll skip that in the interest of time. That's another example of something that we invented where we had to pivot because we got it wrong the first time. So usually you're going to get things wrong the first time. Don't give up. Keep trying. The second or third time it's going to work out, right? So remember, this is going back to Junglee now. So we were the startup, and we had this cool product in the shopping space. And as a startup, one of the things that you need to do in order to to get a lot of people to use your product is that it's helpful to get noticed. It's helpful to get word out there. It's helpful to get press coverage and so on, right? So it's always helpful to get that in order to get people to know about your startup and start using your product. So we needed to do that. But here we were the startup, and we didn't have like a PR budget or anything like that. So how are we going to get get noticed? And so we came up with an idea, and that's the idea. So that is Rakesh Mathur in a black dress. Okay? This is an iconic photo in the history of Silicon Valley. And Rakesh, so what we, it's around this time there was another company called Crossworlds, and the CEO of that company was a woman named Katrina Garnett, and there were ads featuring her wearing this black dress. So we said, let's spoof those ads, convinced Rakesh that he should do that. And God bless his heart, he actually agreed, right? So, so he agreed to do this. So but here was a twist, right? Remember, Junglee was a comparison shopping engine, right? So we were, our whole thing was about finding products cheaper because you can compare prices for the same product across multiple different vendors. So we used Junglee, our own comparison shopping engine, to kit up Rakesh with the same kind of outfit that Katrina was wearing, but much cheaper, right? So that's why it doesn't probably look as good, but because it's cheap. He ended up wearing this. And now this photo then appeared in pretty much every magazine in the US, right? It was a big hit. It put us on the map, right? You get noticed when your CEO is a guy and he wears a black dress, right? So doing something outrageous like this to get attention is something to think about if you're, if you want to get noticed. Although don't do that, that's been done, right? Do something different. Fine, so Junglee gets acquired by Amazon, and then I worked for a couple of years for Amazon in the early days of Amazon. That was a lot of fun. And then I decided, I felt like, something was incomplete, right? So I started this PhD and I dropped out, and it just felt, bad. There's something that I'd left unfinished business, wanted to get closure. So I went back to Stanford and said, look, I want to finish this PhD thing. And so after a couple of years at Amazon, I went back to Stanford. When I went back to Stanford to finish my PhD, then of course I had to meet Jeff again and say, hey Jeff, I'm back. I remember that whole dropping out thing. That's done that. Now I want to come back, and I want to finish my PhD. And Jeff actually did something very interesting. He said, yeah, you come back, finish your PhD. But he said, look, because you've had Junglee and you've sort of had this exit and so on, I'm not going to give you any assistantship. You have to pay your own tuition, right? So when you end up paying your own tuition, you end up finishing up really fast, right? So this was my other discovery. So I came back, and within a few months, I had written my thesis. I was done, right? So I came back, wrote my thesis, graduated within the next year in 2001, actually. So interestingly, so I started my PhD in '93 and I graduated in 2001. So it's 8 years of wall clock time, but in fact there was only 4 years from '93 to '96, and in 2000 and 2001 I was actually working on it. So it's only 4 years of CPU time. That's kind of the way to look at it. 8 years of wall clock time, but 4 years of CPU time, right? So in getting the PhD. So after getting the PhD, I actually remained engaged with Stanford, and I've been teaching there and so on. So after we had, after this time, two of us, Benki, whose picture you saw, and I, we were thinking about the problems that we had when we were starting Junglee, right? When we were starting Junglee, it was hard. Nobody would trust us and give us funding and so on. So we realized there is this gap in the market. There are all these students who are coming up with interesting ideas, and sometimes students and sometimes professors that are interesting ideas, but they're based on kind of deep academic research. And VCs who fund companies are financial people. They don't really understand technology at a deep level, right? They don't understand science and technology at a deep level. They're looking for market adoption and metrics like this. So because they don't understand the technology at a deep level, they're not able to appreciate its use, and they're not able to fund the company at an early stage. And so we said, look, this is a problem that we have to address. So we started a fund called Cambrian Ventures. The goal at Cambrian Ventures was to be a seed fund, was to identify companies that are being started by students and faculty members and so on, who are based on some interesting research, and provide them with seed funding and mentorship to get them to the next stage, where they can actually raise funding from traditional Silicon Valley people. And so we did this, and we actually ended up investing in many companies like this. And typically these companies, unfortunately, none of them came from the IITs. But because I think this was still early, this was late 90s, early 2000. But we did end up investing in a lot of companies coming out from Stanford, from many other universities in the US that went on to do really well. And here's one story that sort of I picked just to give you a sense for how we found startups to invest. And so I was, remember I was at Stanford, and I'd graduated, and after I graduated with my PhD, I stayed engaged at Stanford, and I still teach a class. I teach a class every year at Stanford in the computer science department. And one year, this is 2003 or 2004 when I was teaching, this class on distributed database systems, my TA was this guy, Mayank Bawa. Right? Mayank is an IIT Bombay graduate, and he was doing his IIT Bombay BTech-CS. He was doing his, I think 2000 something, and he was doing his PhD in computer science at Stanford, just like I was several years ago. And he was my TA. So he was be the teaching assistant for the class that I was teaching. And during the course of the class, we discussed many ideas. He wanted to be an entrepreneur, and then he came to me at the end of the class and said, "Here's an idea, and I want to start a company based on this idea." So I said, "Look, I didn't know whether this guy was serious or not, of course, right? Many people have ideas, you don't know whether they're serious or not." So I told him, "Look, I gave him 2 tasks. I told him, go find yourself a co-founder and build a prototype, right? And there were some conditions around what that prototype should do. So he found himself a co-founder, built him and built a prototype. So I ended up funding him, and he started this company called Aster Data. And Aster Data was just this year. They were acquired by a much bigger company in the space called Teradata. So that ended up being a great success as well, right? So there were many examples like this. I just picked one to kind of illustrate the kinds of things that we were doing. So that's one example. Here's another one, right? If your co-founder who wears a dress pitches a startup idea to you, invest in it. Right, so that's so Rakesh started another company called Weberoo, which once again they pivoted and they renamed SMS Gupshup. So they are based in Bombay and Mumbai, and then they're working in the SMS space. So that's another company. How many of you have heard of SMS Gupshup? There you go. So I don't need to tell you that story. So that's Kashyap. Kashyap is IIT Bombay as well. More entrepreneurs from IIT Bombay for some reason, right? So Kashyap is IIT Bombay as well, and he started a company he worked for one of the companies that I had funded in Silicon Valley, and then he decided to move back to India and start a company. And the company that he started was a company called Chowpatty. This was a few years ago, and doing mobile phone commerce. Earlier this year, Chowpatty was acquired by Future Bazaar, and now is part of futurebazaar.com. Right. So these are a few of the examples of the companies that I've been working with in India. So if I sort of look back on my, how am I doing on time? If I look back on my career and sort of think about what's been powering a lot of the things that I've been doing, it sort of revolves around these 3 kind of elements, right? I mean, I fundamentally think of myself as an academic, right? So I'm interested in doing cool things, research, hanging out with professors and students and things like this. This is what I really like doing. So going and teaching. So I'm an academic, but I also happen to be an entrepreneur. And I also happen to be invest in startups and mentor them and so on. So I do all these 3 things. But the interesting thing is when you do these 3 things, you realize that they're all connected, right? There's kind of a virtuous triangle that connects these 3 things. When you're an academic, you sort of you see very interesting ideas, and you see people, students with very interesting ideas. That's how we started our first company. You find co-founders, you find ideas, and you end up starting companies, right? Once you've been an entrepreneur for a while, you get experience which you can use to mentor other people. But you also, when you mentor a lot of people, you also learn about trends that you can use to start companies. But you also learn about trends that you can use to do research around, do research projects around, right? So it's kind of a virtuous kind of cycle between academia and entrepreneurship and research. And for those of you who want to be entrepreneurs going forward, I sort of very highly, I can't encourage highly enough being connected with academia in some way, because it sort of gives you a flow of fresh ideas, fresh people, and it sort of keeps you fresh, rather than sort of keep connected with IIT Madras, keep connected with an academic institution in some capacity. It's really worked very well for me, right? So that's something that I'd highly encourage any of you who want to be entrepreneurs. Make sense? So that's kind of a little bit of my history. So I wanted to spend a minute talking about what I'm working on right now. What I'm working on right now is this place called Walmart Labs. This is the remember my most recent startup, Cosmix, was acquired by Walmart, and I head up a group within Walmart called Walmart Labs. So what does Walmart Labs do? Well, to explain that, so you have to go back a little bit in history, right? If you go back like 30, 40 years ago, if you wanted to buy something, you went to the store, right? But that changed about 15, 16 years ago because the web came around. And when the web came around, there was a fundamental shift in the way people shop, right? E-commerce was born, right? So now we shop online. You don't shop on the web. And so basically, whenever there's a fundamental sort of infrastructure or technology shift, right, the way we shop changes. And there are two fundamental kind of technology shifts that are happening right now that are once again going to change the way we shop. One of them is, social, right? So how many of you are on Facebook? Almost everyone. How many of you are on Twitter? Well, pretty good, right? So you all know about it. So people are spending more and more time on Facebook and on Twitter, clearly. And when you spend more and more time on Facebook and Twitter, what you hear, what your friends say is going to influence the stuff that you buy. In fact, more commerce may actually happen within the context of Facebook and Twitter, right? So that's one. The other interesting trend that's happening is smartphones, right? How many of you have a smartphone? Android or iPhone or BlackBerry, right? So actually a very interesting crossover point happened in the US 2 quarters ago. Was the first quarter when in the US more smartphones were sold than regular feature phones. This happened 2 quarters ago in the US. I think it'll happen maybe a year or so later in India. I was just talking, in fact, to somebody in the who's very knowledgeable about the Indian market in terms of phones, and they were, their prediction was the crossover point in India is going to happen in about maybe a year to 15 months time, when this crossover point happens, when pretty much everybody switches to smartphones. When everybody switches to smartphones, then you can use those for shopping, right? So you can use those to go into a shop and you see a product and you can figure out, read reviews about the product, you can and do interesting things like that. So when you have social and mobile, that fundamentally changes shopping, we believe, in an interesting way. So this is what we're doing at Walmart Labs, right? So we are at the intersection of social, mobile, and retail. We're trying to figure out how does social media and mobile phones, how do they change the way we shop, right? Is it a fundamentally new way of shopping? For example, can you go into a store and we recognize you, based on the phone that you're carrying and tell you, hey, here are some cool new products that you might be interested in, or give you special discounts, or can we, have you install a Facebook app, and based on, knowing the fact that you did like the band or something on Facebook, can we say, here's a new CD for that band, and suggest interesting products for you to buy, right? So all kinds of interesting things around social and mobile, and how it affects shopping. That's what we're working on at Walmart Labs. And Walmart Labs, is based in Silicon Valley, but just this week I was in Bangalore. I just day before yesterday, and I came from Bangalore. We just opened up a group of Walmart Labs in Bangalore. So if any of you are interested in this space, looking for either summer internships or jobs, Walmart Labs in Bangalore. Right, so finally, I just wanted to end with what I'm excited about right now, what really keeps me going. There's a trend that really, really excites me that I wanted to share with you guys. And how many of you have heard about this guy? It's kind of a bunch of the audience here, right? So how many of you have heard of Isaac Newton? Right, everybody else. No, Isaac Newton said something. He said, I could see further because I stood on the shoulders of giants, right? So this guy was one of those giants. So what did this guy Tycho Brahe do? Well, he was this Dutch astronomer in the 15th century, and he spent a lot of time looking at the sky, right? And this is pre-telescope even. And he looked at all the planets and their moons and so on, and he did a very painstaking note of their positions in the sky, at different times of the day, and he compiled this into a big almanac, right? This almanac is the first reasonably sized database in the world, right? So Tycho Brahe actually created the first database. And his database was of astronomical positions of stars and positions of planets and moons and so on over a long period of time. So this guy created the first database. So why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because Tycho Brahe had a student, right? Who was Tycho Brahe's student? Kepler, yeah. So Johann Kepler, right? Johann Kepler used Tycho Brahe's data, and what did he do? He came up with the laws of planetary motion, right? I assume all of you have passed JEE, so you've heard of the laws of planetary motion. So, Johann Kepler, he used Tycho Brahe's data, and by looking at the data and staring at it for long enough, he observed regularities in it, and that's how he came up with the laws of planetary motion, right? And this guy, who we all heard about, he used Tycho Brahe's data as well. And Kepler's observations, and he came up with his famous laws of motion, which are used for such terribly important things as solving JEE problems and so on, and also have other sort of trivial applications like launching satellites and stuff like this, right? So the story, the big point that I want to make is that this is the way science works. You start with data, right? You study the data and you come up with a theory, right? And if your theory is right, there's a whole bunch of applications, right? So this is how science works. Now, why is this interesting? Well, this is interesting because we live in the decade of data, right? There's an unprecedented amount of data that's being created in the world that sort of boggles the imagination. It trivializes anything that's been seen in the past, right? So the quote that I think best summarizes this is the following, and this is from Eric Schmidt, who used to be the CEO of Google, now is the chairman. If you take, we've been creating data since the dawn of human civilization, right? Whenever that was, and if you take all the data that was created from the dawn of human civilization until 2003, including Tycho Brahe's almanac and everything in it, and you look at that amount of data, we create that much data every 2 days now, digitally, right? Can you imagine the amount of data that we're creating, right? Now, what does this mean? This means that there's fundamental scientific discoveries waiting to happen in this data, right? So that's what really excites me, right? Imagine from that little bit of almanac, we came up with Newton's laws of motion. Imagine with all this data, how many scientific discoveries we're going to come with. So the interesting thing is, where is all this data, right? All this data is not locked away in some databases or something like that. It's actually out in public. A lot of it is in social media, right? A lot of this data is in YouTube, in Hulu, in Facebook, in Twitter, in Pandora, in various other places. And it's all publicly accessible data, right? So there's this tons of data, and all of this is publicly accessible. So if back until very recently, the maximum amount of data we had came from the skies. They came from telescopes and astronomical observations, right? So there was data about the planets and the stars and so on. For the first time, if you think about Facebook and Twitter and so on, we have massive amounts of data about ourselves, about society, right? So what this data is going to revolutionize every field that you can think of, for psychology, sociology, economics. Every field is going to be revolutionized by this massive amount of data. And there are scientists, the Isaac Newtons of today, who are going to study this data and come up with the fundamental laws of human society, just as Isaac Newton came up with the fundamental laws of physics. So this is what really truly excites me and sort of keeps me excited and sort of in this field of kind of big data and how to analyze it and extract useful insights from it. Right? So how do we, when we have all this data, you actually have to analyze it and you have to extract useful, how many of you have heard of, how many of you have read Isaac Asimov's Foundation series? Okay, so the Isaac Asimov talks about this thing called psychohistory. And I think for those of you who've read the Foundation series and know what psychohistory is, I think it's going to happen based on this data that we have here. So, and that just gives you the order of magnitude. And this, by the way, I made this slide up like a month or two ago, and it's already outdated. There's more data now, right? It is growing by leaps and bounds. So when you have all this data, you have to sort of, it's too much for you to use pen and paper to extract useful insights like Isaac Newton did, right? So you need to have new techniques for mining all this data. So one of the things that I've been doing over the last few years is that I've been teaching a class at Stanford on how to analyze large amounts of data and extract useful information from it. When I first started teaching the class, there were like 20 students who showed up. But then we had 40, then we had 80, and the last time I taught it, I had over 150 students. So clearly there's a lot more interest in looking at this problem, which is called big data, and pulling out insights from it. And for those of you who are interested in this, that's my co-instructor, Jeff Ullman, who also featured in the story earlier. Jeff Ullman and I wrote a textbook on how to analyze large amounts of data and extract useful information from it. This is a textbook that we used to teach our class. Because we wrote this textbook because we were teaching the class and there was not a good textbook to teach it from, so we wrote one. For those of you who are interested, it's available for free. You can just download it from our website, right? You don't need to pay the $55 to buy the book. You can download it for free and read it on your Kindle or your iPad or whatever you have. I think it's a skill that every scientist and every engineer should have in this new era, how to mine large amounts of data and extract intelligence from it. So, or if just remember the name and Google it. So, right? So data is the new lever, right? Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough, and I can move the world, right? Turned out to be wrong, but data is the new lever. If you have enough data, you can solve any problem. And with that thought, if you'd like to contact me, that's my contact info. Any questions? Questions?
Actually, I have two questions.
Okay.
One for the Senior Vice President of Walmart,
Okay.
e-commerce.
Who's that? Oh, okay, me. Okay.
Of course, Walmart is a 4-pound gorilla in marketplace, but when it comes to market space, there is digital space where you can expect a lot of competitions, particularly from sites like eBay, which gives power to personal sellings, and also a lot of small startup companies are coming. We focus on segmented and niche market. How you can compete it?
So is your question that Walmart is the biggest retailer in the world,
Yes.
but clearly Walmart is not the biggest player in the e-commerce space,
Yes.
right? Amazon is the biggest player in the e-commerce space, right? Walmart is not. And is your question? The question is how do we?
How you became a first?
How do we aim to catch up? How are we going
What
to
about your
catch up?
strategy to compete there?
Yeah. So I think that's a very good question. So the best way to compete, right, is to change the rules of the game, right? So if you're losing, right, just change the rules, right? Then you can win. And I'm sure you've done this many times when you're playing. So and this is true in this world as well, right? So the way to think about this is the fact that social and mobile are fundamentally changing what online shopping means, right? When we think of e-commerce, we think about going to a website and ordering a product. That's traditional e-commerce. That's what Amazon does. That's what Flipkart does. That's kind of the traditional e-commerce. On the other hand, think that because of smartphones and social, they are completely going to blur the lines between online shopping and offline shopping, right? People, when you take your phone to a store, right, and you see a product, and you scan it and say, deliver this to my home, is that e-commerce or not, right? Or if you go to a website and you order a product, but then you pick it up the same day at a store, is that e-commerce or is that offline shopping, right? So our goal is to completely redefine what e-commerce means by sort of blurring the line between offline commerce and online commerce.